Well, welcome back everybody to another video of mine discussing the Word of Faith movement and the prosperity gospel, both of which are really no gospel at all. They're not Christian at all, and unfortunately they've crept into our churches today and are deceiving lots of people. And it breaks, oh no, it breaks my heart to see people being deceived in that way. It breaks my heart to see how this has crept into really just mainstream evangelicalism. And so I'm putting out this podcast to aid in the effort of completely and utterly destroying the Word of Faith movement and the prosperity gospel. I would be so happy if 10 years from now, the movements were completely and totally gone and people were no longer being deceived by them. People were no longer naming and claiming anything, but that they'd actually be believing in the biblical Christ. That being said, that's going to take a little bit of your help as well. So, share this information. If you know people that are caught up in the Word of Faith movement, click the shiny buttons down below and you can share it with people that you love and care about and want them to know the truth of the gospel. That being said, also, thank you for everybody who reached out to me with words of encouragement and nice things to say about the last video. I really didn't know what the public feedback was going to be when I put it out. It's my first time really doing a video like that, and the response has been really encouraging. So thank you all very much. I really appreciate the encouragement. Your love and your prayers are really appreciated. So before we jump into our lesson for today, I want to give you two really awesome resources for furthering your own study of the Word of Faith and prosperity gospel movements. The first is the Defend and Confirm podcast. They have put out like 4 episodes here toward, I guess, end of April, going into May. Yeah. They've put out 4 episodes discussing the prosperity movement, Word of Faith theology, and things like that. They go much more into depth on some of the historical background than what I'm going to be able to do today. So if you're interested in going into more depth on things like that, I highly recommend it. Their videos are only like 15 to 20 minutes each, so they're bite-sized, they're accessible, they're simple to understand. This is not a super, not to say they're not intelligent, it's not a super scholarly podcast. So those of you that know that I like to listen to the really nerdy theological scholarly stuff, this isn't one of those podcasts that's going to scare you away with big words. They're really accessible, really understandable, really detailed, and really well organized. All of which, I'm some of those things, but organized isn't one of them. So highly recommend their resource. Another great resource for you is the book God, Greed, and the Prosperity Gospel by Costi Hinn. You can grab it on Audible for like 1 credit or $15. That's how I read it. I listened to it on Audible. It's a fairly short book, really accessible. This is written by, like I said, Costi Hinn. He is the nephew of Benny Hinn, who is one of the most well-known like faith healer, prosperity preachers today. Costi got saved out of that movement and spent several years really studying and getting himself straight with the help of some great pastors. And then turned around and is calling his uncle in particular, but that whole side of the family that's caught up in that movement. He's calling them to repentance and faith in the true Christ. And this book is kind of his testimony of where he's from and how he came out of that, how he realized his beliefs are false and things like that. So if you want to hear it from the proverbial horse's mouth, that's where you want to get it from. One other resource that is really helpful that I don't have pulled up on my screen because I didn't think about it until now is the Sheologians podcast. That is, let's just go to, I think it's sheologians.com. Pretty sure. Is it? Yes, it is. If it'll load. Okay. Sheologians, God, Greed, and the Prosperity Gospel, they actually interviewed Costi Hinn, so you get to hear sort of his account of writing the book and some of the stuff where he's coming from, and he elaborates on some points that aren't quite brought out in the book. So really great podcast. I've listened to it twice in one day. It was that good. So go check it out if you want to learn more about these things. So with that being said, we are moving on to our not our introduction. What am I talking about? We're moving on to our history of the Word of Faith movement. Because I mentioned in the last video, and I firmly believe this, that if you knew where the Word of Faith movement came from, if you knew some of the historical background and historical context, you probably would be less inclined to believe the theology of it. Because for me, anytime that we think we've come up with something new or novel within the Christian faith, there's two things that are probably happening. First of all, we're probably flirting with disastrous heresy. Straight up, anytime you think you've come up with something new, it's probably not new either. That's the second thing. Most of the time we think we have something new and unique or novel, that some great new understanding of the Bible that we've come to see that nobody else has ever seen before. Go do some reading in church history, and there's probably somebody condemned as a heretic that has taught the exact things that you're thinking right then and there. It's funny how that happens. History just has a habit of repeating itself, and we can see through church history. We've got 2,000 years of understanding of the Bible. It doesn't make much sense to say, oh, we've come up with all this new stuff. So, highly recommend not coming up with new and novel ideas. So I want to look at some of the history of the Word of Faith and prosperity gospel movements, particularly the Word of Faith movement, which bleeds over into the prosperity gospel later on. And I think when we come to an understanding of the history, we'll come to understand that this is not in any way biblical. It's really new, it's novel, and it's really dangerous. So, first person that we need to point out in our list of people we need to point out is a dude by the name of Phineas Quimby. I have his Wikipedia article open right here in front of me. You will notice that if you go through his Wikipedia, and there's not much on him. He was a relatively not well-known name, lived in the 1800s. He was the guy who came up with this concept known as New Thought. But I just need to point out, before we go any further, Phineas Quimby was not a Christian. I mean, hands down, not a Christian. His beliefs are not Christian in any way, shape, or form. The thing that is interesting is that he is the one that we can trace back most of the Word of Faith movement to. The people that were the leaders and sort of the grandfathers of the Word of Faith movement were all directly influenced by Quimby. If your movement is directly influenced by unchristian sources, there's a pretty good chance it's unchristian. Just need to throw that out there. So Phineas Quimby came up with this idea known as New Thought, and I have the New Thought Wikipedia over here. And before you guys are like, oh, well, Wikipedia isn't a very scholarly source. I know, I'm not attempting to be super scholarly. I'm just trying to get some basic information out there. There's all sorts of resources down below here, references, bibliography, and all sorts of stuff you could go through if you want to get super technical with it. I'm not looking to get super technical. I'm just giving you a brief history and outline. New Thought, also known as Higher Thought, is this movement that developed largely due to the guy named Phineas Quimby. And it's the belief that your thoughts actually have an influence over physical things, particularly when it comes to healing. So, within New Thought, and I should say within what Phineas Quimby espoused as New Thought, Quimby was convinced that our physical illnesses are the result of improper thinking. Basically that our physical beings are really only a reflection of our divine beings, that is, our spiritual self. And remember, in most of this is really Eastern mysticism, paganism being wrapped into all of this. Within most of this New Age mystical thought, your divine self is a reflection of the divine universe. Very often you don't have a personal being known as God. You have a collective consciousness of the universe known as God. And once again, that's completely unchristian. God is a personal God. This idea of the universe bestowing things to you, or the universe giving you positive things when you put positive vibes out to it, it's all completely unchristian. Quimby had this idea that our physical bodies are really only a manifestation or a reflection of our spiritual bodies, and therefore, if you're sick, it's because you're not thinking properly. And so what you actually need to do is rework your mind to get into this mindset of like, no, I'm not actually sick, I'm in perfect health right now. And your thoughts would end up changing your physical body because your body's just a reflection of your thoughts. It's mind over matter taken to a literal extreme. And so that's what New Thought is. One of the things that is interesting, and I forget where I read it, New Thought has really developed as a movement. It's apparently still a movement going on today. Doesn't surprise me if word faith theology is still a thing today. Then the unchristian version of that, the New Thought, should still be going on today. There's a lot of people that would argue that speaking things is sort of like putting your thoughts in concrete form, and therefore it has more influence. And so I forget if it was in the article on Quimby that he actually taught that if you just speak something over and over again, he was a mesmer, so it was a form of hypnotism, basically. If you're sick, you just speak wellness over and over and over again, and eventually that illness will go away because you're speaking it away, because you're manifesting your spiritual self, your God self, through your words. Remember, Quimby was not a Christian. This movement, this New Thought movement that I have up here on the screen, not Christian in any way, shape, or form. And yet it's dangerously close to the word of faith theology. So, the reason for that... Oh, hey, there's Quimby again. What is this? Go away. The reason for that is... I have this over here on this other screen. Oh, I don't have her on this other screen. Let's do this. Let's open up a new Wikipedia tab. Let's see if I can do this without destroying my recording. If I hit full screen on any window, it automatically kills my recording, and I have to start from scratch. So I need to not hit full screen on anything. We're going to go back to Wikipedia. Ooh, why is it being dumb? Y'all are watching a video of me fumbling around with the internet trying to make this stuff work. Okay, so here we have this lady named Mary Baker Eddy. She is the founder of a movement known as Christian Science. And I need to let you know right off the bat, this movement is not scientific and it's not Christian. Back in the day, they tried to make it sound like it was, but it's really not. If you want a great breakdown of Christian Science, look up the podcast Cultish. They just interviewed a guy who was like 5th generation Christian Scientist. Basically, Christian scientists believe that all matter is non-existent. Your physical body, this microphone in front of me, the computer that I'm recording this on, this is all actually just a grand illusion. The only thing that's real is your spirit, your mind. And so if you're sick, what you do is you practice these spiritual disciplines to remind yourself that your illness doesn't actually exist because your body doesn't actually exist. And therefore, if you're sick, you don't go and take medicine. If you take medicine, you're demonstrating that you don't actually have faith, and therefore you're not going to get well. So don't take any kind of medicine. Don't go to the doctor for any kind of medical treatment. You have to practice certain things in order to be made well again, and medicine is a big no-no within the Christian Science movement. Like I said, it's not Christian, it's not scientific. But that's interesting to point out because Mary Baker Eddy was a student, or she was apparently healed by Phineas Quimby. Let me see. I think Mary Baker Eddy, the founder of Christian Science, has sometimes been cited as having used Quimby as inspiration for theology. Eddy was a patient of Quimby's and shared his view that disease is rooted in a mental cause. But because of its theism, Christian Science differs from the teachings of Quimby. So Mary Baker Eddy started a cult, basically, and she kind of Christianized the ideas of Quimby. Once again, that your thoughts are the predominant driving force that actually has power in your life, and that your physical body isn't super important. Mary Baker Eddy is not tied directly into the Word of Faith movement, but it is super helpful to bring her out because I like demonstrating that the teachings of Quimby, which she actually, if I remember correctly from the podcast on Cultish, she actually plagiarized some of Quimby's works and basically espoused them as her own in one of her main books, and then later on just completely deleted that section from the book when people started calling her out on it. So she took Quimby's teachings and turned them into her own version known as Christian Science. On a similar vein, we have a guy by the name of E.W. Kenyon. E.W. Kenyon... he doesn't have a picture here. That's sad. E.W. Kenyon is basically the guy that started the Word of Faith movement. And once again, if you listen to the Defend and Confirm podcast that I mentioned earlier, Kenyon apparently also plagiarized the works of Quimby. In fact, I should point this out, and once again, you can check out the Cultish podcast for more info on this. Phineas Quimby would be a unknown figure to us, historically speaking, were it not for the writings of E.W. Kenyon and Mary Baker Eddy. If these two had not plagiarized Quimby and stolen his thoughts and started teaching them as their own, Quimby would probably not be known to us today. So just super interesting that you have the the cult of Christian Science that is a result of plagiarizing Quimby's works, and then you have E.W. Kenyon, who's really the founder of the Word of Faith movement, that ended up plagiarizing Quimby's works. And so you can see it says right here, it has been suggested by some that Kenyon was the originator of the modern positive confession theology, which is prevalent in Word of Faith Pentecostalism. Proponents of this view suggest that Kenyon's religious views were heavily influenced by the New Thought movement during his time at the Emerson School, and that he developed a teaching of positive confession from that influence. So E.W. Kenyon went about teaching a number of different things. I think I have them on the slide right here, maybe. E.W. Kenyon, the main thing that he really did that was super helpful for the Word of Faith movement as a whole to develop, and I misspelled it in the slide. I'm sorry. I'm a disaster today, apparently. Kenyon took Phineas Quimby's not theology, but his beliefs about the spiritual and physical nature of things, the fact that the mind is in control of everything, and he put a thin veneer of Christianity on top of it. So Kenyon is responsible for Christianizing Phineas Quimby's otherwise completely mystical pagan New Age beliefs. So once again, I have to caution us and say, if you're taking something that is completely unchristian in its origin and then just slathering some Jesus on top of it and claiming that it's a Christian movement, you're probably actually going down the wrong road. We don't get our doctrine by taking pagan religions and then slathering Christianity on top. We get our doctrines by reading the Bible, exegeting it properly, understanding it in its historical and grammatical context, and coming to an understanding of what God has revealed. Kenyon Christianized and sort of systematized the idea that your words and that your beliefs and that your thoughts can have an influence on things. One of the things that he is well known for teaching, and this is still a prevalent Word of Faith teaching today, is that healing was guaranteed for somebody with faith. If you were sick, you needed to believe and practice a positive confession to have that sickness healed. I'm not sure if he would be the one responsible for sort of trying to import Isaiah 53, by his stripes we are healed, and use that as sort of the proof text for his beliefs. I'm not sure if that was him that did that or if that was a later development. But yeah, E.W. Kenyon, the grandfather of all this other stuff that we're dealing with. Oral Roberts is the next person that we need to talk about, and we're already running out of time, so we'll have to wrap things up here soon. I already have him up on another screen, don't I? Oh, well. Oral Roberts is, or I should say was, a teacher who, oh man, he was a pastor. He was a pastor of a small church for a while. It didn't really work out. One day, apparently, he went to flip open the Bible, and it fell open to 3 John, and I don't see it on here. It fell open to 3 John, and there's a line in there that basically says, "I want you to have life and life abundantly." And so Oral Roberts went out and bought a Buick, because apparently that's living the abundant life back whenever he did that. I don't know if I would consider Buicks a sign of abundance now, but hey, there it is. But he bought a Buick, and then apparently as a result of practicing his faith and practicing this understanding of abundance, God appeared to him and told him he needed to go and start having these healing crusades and things like that. So Oral Roberts was responsible for running around and doing a whole bunch of faith healing events and these big crusades. He apparently prayed for over 2 million people, like hands-on prayer and things like that. The most notable thing about him, though, is the fact that he founded the school known as Oral Roberts University. This is pretty much an unknown fact to many of us in the modern era, because we don't put much emphasis on colleges and universities other than the piece of paper we get after we're done saying, hey, you did it. But when you found a university, or when you have really any school of higher learning, it's actually put in place to have an impact on the culture around it. the historical impact that schools like Yale and Princeton and Cambridge have had on the culture today are just phenomenally huge. Like, we can't underestimate the impact that systems of higher learning have on society as a whole. So when you're looking, for example, at the way that Cambridge or Princeton or a university like that are going today, which is extremely far to the left, culturally and theologically speaking, it has an impact on lots of other things in the culture. So Oral Roberts founded a school, Oral Roberts University, that was well known for teaching this abundant life theology. And it's really interesting because somewhere in this article, there's a line saying that, well, Oral Roberts was, he was sort of criticized for teaching prosperity theology, but he didn't teach prosperity theology. He taught abundant life theology. The bottom line is, if you look up abundant life theology and what Oral Roberts believed, he believed that believing in God and having actual faith in God means that you should be blessed with health, happiness, and financial well-being. Maybe that's not the same overflowing of abundance of the prosperity gospel and what people like Kenneth Hagin ended up teaching, or Kenneth Copeland teach today. But there you have it. He established a school that systematized and taught what would come to be known as the prosperity movement. So there are a number of teachers that move further down the line in the Word of Faith movement, and that sort of blends into the prosperity movement right around the 1950s as our nation as a whole starts to be more prosperous. Kenneth Hagin is a big name there. I would say he's really the founder of the prosperity gospel. So you have the Word of Faith teachings that end up bleeding into and sort of shifting into the prosperity gospel. Kenneth Hagin started promoting the prosperity gospel. Kenneth Copeland promotes it today. There are a whole bunch of people running around saying that God wants you to be just outrageously wealthy, and that's all a sign of your faith, but that's a video for another day. So to wrap things up, to keep this video a reasonable length and keep it understandable, we need to see that this Word of Faith theology, this belief that if you just speak your positive confessions and you practice positive thoughts, you will be made well, is just a rebranding and a reskinning of this new thought movement that's really based upon mysticism and mystical practices, New Age thought, and that kind of a thing. That is to say that the historical background of the Word of Faith movement is completely unchristian. And I would say, please go and read some of the early church fathers, go and read believers from thousands of years ago, and what you will not find in their theology and what you will not find in their writings is this idea that if you speak it with your mouth and if you declare it, it will come to be. Those things, they just don't exist, historically speaking. It can all be traced back to Phineas Quimby, who was not a Christian. So the background of the Word of Faith movement is that it's not Christian. The current practice of the Word of Faith movement is not biblical at all. It's just not there. And I'm sorry if that, shakes your foundations a little bit, if you're sitting there saying, well, wait a second, I put a lot of faith in my faith. The idea that I can speak myself into wellness or I can speak money into my wallet. I'm sorry, but you're being deceived. And I love you too much to let you go on in that deception, but I need you to understand what you're believing is a lie. It's not biblical. And the Jesus that you believe in, if you believe in the Jesus that wants you to be healthy, wealthy, and financially prosperous, you don't believe in the biblical Jesus that's the Savior of your soul. Turn from this false belief, turn to the true Christ, find yourself a solid church, and get away from the beliefs that you're in right now. So there you have it. I hope this has been helpful. Remember, if this has been helpful for you, please share the video with your friends so that more people can be impacted. If you don't like something that I said, leave a comment down below. I'd be happy to read it over, possibly do a response to it a little bit later on. For next week's video, I'm going to start taking a look at some of the common biblical passages that are used to try to support Word of Faith theology. Because really, when you start, once again, understanding the Bible in a proper historical grammatical context, what you're going to see is that these movements, not only is it historically unchristian, but biblically, it's not even close. The way that you have to twist and distort the Bible to try to make it say the things that Word of Faith and prosperity preachers say that it says, it's just unbelievable. So stick around. That'll be the video probably next week sometime, Lord willing. And I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.